What have we learned about Brandon Beane and his draft tendencies as general manager of the Buffalo Bills? We're going to examine all of it today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Wednesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. I'm excited for today's content. We are going to dig into all of the tendencies and trends that we've learned about Brandon Beane and his history drafting for the Buffalo Bills. And I love doing this because it gives us some really good clues and insight into what we can expect this time around. And so as we continue our preparations for the 2022 NFL Draft, we're now going to have a really good understanding of what history has taught us about Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, and their tendencies in the NFL Draft. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of data, and I'll do my best to sort through this data and tell you what's important and why it matters. So let's start with some general information. The Bills have made 37 draft picks since Sean McDermott took over as head coach. 31 of those 37 were made with Brandon Beane as the general manager. For all of the conversation that we're going to have today, I'm lumping them together to dig into the tendencies. I'm not going to omit the 2017 class where Sean McDermott navigated the Bills through that process before Brandon Beane was hired a couple days later. Why? It's because Sean McDermott influences everything. It's his scheme. It's his vision for the football operation. And Brandon Beane, his job is to get Sean McDermott the types of players that he wants for the football operation based on prototypes, whether that's personality, character, or scheme. And so I don't think it's worthwhile to omit the 2017 class, even though Brandon Beane wasn't here. So now that we've established that, let's get into this information. I want to first look at all 37 picks and identify what positions they were. So since 2017, the Bills have drafted 3 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 6 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 6 offensive linemen, 6 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers, 5 cornerbacks, 2 safeties, and 1 specialist. So leading the way, 6 receivers, 6 offensive linemen, 6 defensive linemen. And you know those are the 3 spots where the Bills continue to invest, whether it's draft capital or free agent dollars. Those are the positions of the greatest importance to the Buffalo Bills. Wide receiver, O-line, D-line. Now let's look at these draft picks by conference. And this is really interesting to me. And when I say conference, I mean the conference that the player they drafted played their college football in. So again, 37 draft picks. 5 came from the American Athletic Conference. That's the AAC. 12 came from the ACC. You think Brandon Beane and his background growing up in North Carolina doesn't play into the overwhelming, I wouldn't say like majority of picks, but the high percentage of picks coming from the ACC? 2 from the Big 10, 2 from the Big 12, 1 from Conference USA, 4 from the FCS level, 1 from the MAC, 2 from the Mountain West, 3 from the Pac-12, 4 from the SEC, and 1 from the Sun Belt. 12 of 37 draft picks coming from the ACC. No other conference has produced more than 4. So if you want to find future Buffalo Bills players, I advise you to watch ACC football. It's kind of crazy that the second most frequent place that they go for football players is the AAC. It's not another Power 5 conference. It's the AAC. Now, here's what's kind of cool about that. You know what my region is for the Draft Network? My scouting responsibilities? ACC and AAC. So Brandon Beane and I are looking at the same players, right? So that's kind of fun. So 37 draft picks, 23 from the Power 5, 10 from mid-majors, 4 from the FCS level. What's really interesting, not only is the high percentage of ACC players that the Bills have picked, 32% of the draft picks the Bills have made are from the ACC, and the league average is around 15%. So that's obviously a pretty high clip that the Bills are picking players from the ACC. It's that only 11% of the players the Bills have drafted, only 4 out of 37 draft picks came from the SEC. And on average, about 25% or more of picks in the draft come from the SEC. 1 in 4. For the Bills, it's 1 in 10. It's kind of crazy. The rest of the league wants SEC players. The Bills said, no, we're good. Why is that? I've speculated on this. I think that this stems from the SEC kind of being the best of the best. It's where all the 5-star recruits go play football. And so it's this collection of players and schools that think they're the best, and these talented players that have been told they're so good at football their whole life. Right? It's people that have things have kind of come easy for him. And you know that's not the Buffalo way. That's not the Sean McDermott way. He wants people that have earned everything they have. And so that's why I think the Bills gravitate away from SEC players, is because there's this natural tendency for players from the SEC to be from elite, football powerhouses and high pedigree players, 5-star recruits, guys that have always been the best player on their team. The Bills would rather have guys that have had to work and earn their way. And I'm not saying 5-star recruits haven't done that. But there's a big difference in a 5-star recruit that dominated in middle school and high school and goes to Alabama and dominates versus a 2-star kid that went to, you name it, Virginia, Boston College, Northern Iowa, Houston. They want that kid to come on and be part of the Buffalo Bills. That's my speculation as to why the distribution of picks have come like they have in terms of conference. Another thing that is a major trend in Brandon Beane's draft history is that he likes to pick players that went to the Senior Bowl. 37 draft picks, 20 participated in the Senior Bowl. 54%. That's the second highest in the NFL. The Chargers are first at 56%. The Bills number 2 at 54%. The next closest after the Bills at 54% is 44%, a pretty big drop there. There's only 7 total teams, including the Bills, that have 40% or more of their picks coming from the Senior Bowl. So the Bills definitely like to scout the Senior Bowl and pick players that choose to compete at the Senior Bowl. So you want to find Bills players, pay attention to the Senior Bowl, pay attention to the ACC, pay attention to the AAC. I also found this to be interesting. 36 of the 37 players that the Bills have drafted under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane were invited to participate in the NFL Scouting Combine. Austin Proehl, the only draft pick that wasn't a combine invitation. Let's take a quick look at the trade history under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane when it comes to the NFL draft. So they traded back, right, in 2017 and got Trey White. They traded up for Zay Jones. They traded up for Deion Dawkins. And so that's kind of your Sean McDermott bucket. Then Brandon Beane comes into the mix. They trade up for Josh Allen. They trade up for Tremaine Edmonds. They trade up for Cody Ford, and they trade up for Dawson Knox. The first time Brandon Beane ever traded back was in 2021, this past year. And it was late in the draft. He traded away pick 174 for picks 203 and 212. In 4 drafts under Brandon Beane, 18, 19, 20, and 2021, he's traded up 4 times and once down. So that's definitely a tendency there. And remember, he commented on trading back, and he said the reason they traded back and gave up 174 for 203 and 212 is because he didn't think he could get undrafted free agents to come to Buffalo because the roster was too good, and they didn't think they had a realistic chance to compete and make the roster. And so he wanted to gain an extra draft pick to make sure that he got a certain amount of players to come in. So for as much as we talk about trading up and going and getting players because the Bills have a deep and talented roster, there's that other side of it where because they have a deep and talented roster, they want to stockpile late round picks so that way they can make sure they get bodies to come in and compete for the training camp roster. I also want to talk real quick about the first round. So the Bills have made 5 first-round picks under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. Their names are Josh Allen, Ed Oliver, Tremaine Edmonds, Tre'Davious White, and Greg Rousseau. They also traded away a first-round pick to acquire Stephon Diggs. What's interesting to me about this is that all 6 of the first-round investments that they made, let's include Stephon Diggs into this because it's a first-round investment. Every single one have been on a premium position except for Tremaine Edmonds. And remember, Tremaine Edmonds was very specific because they wanted to get that quarterback of the defense. The only player the Bills have drafted in the first or second round under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane that wasn't a premium position player was Tremaine Edmonds. And when I say non-premium positions, I'm referring to specialists, running backs, tight ends, interior offensive linemen, linebackers, and safeties. Every other first and second round pick under McDermott and Beane has been a premium position except for Tremaine Edmonds. I think that's fascinating. And I think that's smart. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed, durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' Insane Protection Program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They will send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. So give them a try, and if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners, head to shadyrays.com and use code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. So we dug into some of the general tendencies, positions, conference, the Senior Bowl factor, the NFL Scouting Combine invite factor, trades, and kind of that deep dive into the first round and those premium draft picks and how they always have been premium positions. And I think we've learned a lot so far, and we got a lot more to learn because the rest of the way here, I want to go position by position and look at some of the trends that we've learned. And I went through and I logged a bunch of data, obviously a lot in terms of what conference, combine invitation, Senior Bowl, but also I went through their heights, weights, arm lengths, hand size, all the athletic testing numbers. And I want to share with you some of the things that I learned. And not all of this is going to be groundbreaking, but it does give us some clues into what the Bills prioritize And part of that could be, and we'll go again, position by position, part of that could be is that they don't prioritize anything in particular. And I think that's worth noting as well. So let's dig into it. We'll start with quarterbacks. The Bills have drafted 3 quarterbacks. Josh Allen in the first round. That was a good pick, huh? And then 2 fifth-round picks, Nathan Peterman and Jake Fromm. That's it. A first-round pick and 2 fifth-round picks in 5 years. The only thing that I could find that I thought was in common between Allen, Peterman, and Fromm is that they are all over 6'2", and they're all over 219 pounds. So I do think that the Bills prioritize size in quarterbacks. I don't think they're going to be looking at quarterbacks that are 6 foot, 205 pounds. They want size. I think they want 6'2", they want 220 or better. Now, it's a little bit challenging to lump in Jake Fromm to this conversation because you can even go back to when the Bills picked Jake Fromm and you listen to Brandon Beane talk about the pick, and you could tell he's like, yeah, we really didn't plan on doing this, but he was on the board and, he had a great career at Georgia and we wanted to take a swing. It was like they didn't even prepare for it. It was really out of left field. So I always like to mention that when I talk about Jake Fromm as a Bills draft pick, because you listen to Sean or Brandon Beane talk about it, it's like, it doesn't sound like he really meant to do it. Moving on to running back, the Bills in 5 years under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, they've drafted 2 running backs. That's it. Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, both third-round picks. There's 2 things that I noticed that are in common with Zach Moss and Devin Singletary. First of all, neither are good athletes, right? They're both very below average in terms of athletic testing relative to running backs. And what does that tell me? That athleticism isn't necessarily an important trait for this regime at running back. They took 2 very slow running backs. So explosiveness on the lexicon of traits that the Bills evaluate running backs through is not a high priority. Now, look, they might draft Breece Hall this year, and we'll say, wow, they do love athleticism. But maybe that's just an example of them learning a lesson and feeling like they need to prioritize that a bit more. The second thing that I think Moss and Singletary have in common is a history of sustained production in college. The 2 running backs that they've drafted are both guys that had a nice resume of being productive college running backs. Let's move on to wide receiver. The Bills have drafted 6 wide receivers. Zay Jones in the 2nd round, Gabriel Davis in the 4th round, in the 6th round, Marquez Stevenson, Isaiah Hodgins, and Ray McLeod, and then Austin Proehl in the 7th round. I think it's interesting that Brandon Beane hasn't picked a wide receiver earlier than Gabriel Davis at pick 128. Zay Jones, that was a Sean McDermott pick, and it was influenced because the Bills had Zay Jones, former position coach from college, on their staff. But the Bills under Brandon Beane have not picked a receiver sooner than 128 overall. Now, part of that could be that they've went the veteran route, right? They've signed John Brown, Cole Beasley, they traded for Stephon Diggs. And so they were never really needing to get a top option in the passing game because they've signed those players, and there hasn't been that type of need. But I think that's at least interesting. I didn't find anything discernible in terms of size or athleticism thresholds by looking at the receivers the Bills have drafted because they're all different athletic profiles and size profiles. At tight end, the Bills have drafted 2. That's it. Dawson Knox in the 3rd round, Tommy Sweeney in the 7th round. Interestingly enough, both were in the 2019 draft. So in 5 drafts under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, 4 of them did not include picking a tight end. They picked 2, both in the same year. That's it. The common themes that I can find in Knox and Sweeney is that they're both over 6'4", and they're both over 250 pounds. And if I'm not mistaken, all of the tight ends that they brought in are over 6'4" and 250 pounds, like Tyler Kroft, like O.J. Howard, like Lee Smith. I think that they like that size dynamic. They're one of those teams that prioritizes 250 pounds. Now we'll see, that could change, but I think that's the common denominator that I could find when considering these tight ends the Bills have drafted. Let's look at the offensive line. They've drafted 6 offensive linemen: Deion Dawkins and Cody Ford in the 2nd round, Spencer Brown in the 3rd round, Wyatt Teller and Tommy Doyle in the 5th round, Jack Anderson in the 7th round. What stands out to me about these offensive linemen that they've drafted is that none of them are under 310 pounds. They're all 310 plus. And so I think the Bills value that size dynamic in offensive linemen. Now, in terms of athleticism, they're all over the place. You've got some elite caliber athletes in Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle. Then you've got guys like Cody Ford, who's a below average athlete. So it's kind of tough to find anything athletically that they all share in common, but they're all 310 plus. And they're all over 34-inch arms, except for Jack Anderson, who was a 7th round pick last year. But Dawkins, Ford, Brown, Doyle, Teller all have at least 34-inch arms. So if you're looking for a Bills offensive lineman, over 310 pounds, over 34-inch arms. I think those are traits that they really value at the offensive line. We talk about Built Bars. It's the world's best tasting protein bars, but have you tried the Puffs? If you haven't, then you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate, because all Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, and they're healthy for you. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. There's so many great flavors. They have coconut, raspberry, mint brownie, coconut almond, and new flavors are coming out all the time. So check out Built.com often to see what's new. And at Built Bar, it's all about taste. They make it taste delicious first, then they figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how they do it, but they pull it off every single time. Got a deal for you? Go to Built.com. Use our promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, let's go through the defensive side of the football and see what we can decipher here from this draft history. We'll go to defensive end. The Bills have drafted 4 defensive ends under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. Gregory Rousseau in the 1st round, AJ Epinesa and Boogie Basham in the 2nd round, and then Daryl Johnson, a 7th round pick. What I've noticed about all of these players is that they each have over 32 and 7/8 inch arms. So I think their cutoff is probably 33 inches. I think they prefer that in their defensive ends. The guy with 32 and 7/8 is Boogie Basham. But Epinesa, Johnson, and Rousseau all had really outstanding length. So I think they prioritize arm length in these defensive ends. At defensive tackle, the Bills have only drafted 2 defensive tackles. Ed Oliver in the 1st round, Harrison Phillips in the 3rd round. That's it. Now, I couldn't find anything discernible about the size and the athleticism testing between Oliver and Phillips, because, Oliver's one of the most unique players in the league. He doesn't check any of the boxes in terms of size. It's like 285 pounds and short arms. But he's an insane athlete. But what both players did have in common is a high amount of bench press reps. Ed Oliver did 32 reps at 225. Harrison Phillips did 42 reps at 225. Now, I'm not sure it's enough of a sample size to really glean anything from this, but I thought it was worth noting at least. And one thing that I'll say about defensive end and defensive tackle, we'll lump this together, we're talking about 6 players, is that 5 of the 6 were taken on day 1 or day 2. The only day 3 defensive lineman the Bills have drafted is Daryl Johnson. That's it. And so I think the Bills are very much, if we're picking defensive linemen, we're using high picks on them because we don't think that these late round guys are going to come through. Moving on to linebacker. The Bills have drafted 4 linebackers. Tremaine Edmonds in the first round, Matt Milano and Vashawn Joseph in the 5th round, Tanner Vallejo in the 6th round. I don't think there's anything discernible when you look at Edmonds, Milano, Joseph, and Vallejo and learn anything about size and athleticism thresholds. But I do think it's interesting that the Bills really haven't drafted this position. They didn't draft any in 2021. They didn't draft any in 2020. The last linebacker they picked was Vashawn Joseph in 2019. So obviously they have Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds, but the depth has been just like a lot of players they've acquired that are veterans, like Andre Smith. Tyrell Dotson was a UDFA. AJ Klein. Julian Stanford. Think about these depth linebackers the Bills have had, and Markel Lee. They're a lot of them are veterans, guys that have a little time on task in the league. What's interesting that I do want to mention here, because Vashawn Joseph name, it comes up here. The Bills have only drafted 2 players under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane that never appeared in an NFL game. Vashawn Joseph is one of them. The other is Austin Prohl. So 35 of the 37 players they've drafted have all appeared in at least one NFL game. Oh, by the way, over that same time frame, the New England Patriots have drafted 8 players that have never appeared in an NFL game. So if you think that Bill Belichick is this mastermind that just is a phenomenal general manager and drafts good players, that ain't Bill Belichick. Let's move on to cornerback. The Bills have drafted 5 cornerbacks under Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. Trey White in the 1st round, Taron Johnson in the 4th round, Saron Neal in the 5th round, Rashad Wildgoose in the 6th round, Dane Jackson in the 7th round. Now, it's interesting that Trey White is the only day 1 or day 2 pick in 5 drafts at corner, right? And that kind of drives us crazy. We want some more talented cornerbacks in here. But Trey White's your only day 1 or day 2 pick in the last 5 years. Now, there is some things about the cornerbacks that stand out to me. All of the cornerbacks that the Bills have drafted are over 5'11". All of them are above 187 pounds. And all are above 30 3/8 inch arms. So I think that they do value size a little bit here. I think they want 31-inch arms. I think they want at least 190 pounds. And I think they want 5'11" or better. Now, in terms of the athleticism, there is nothing discernible there because none of these guys are great athletes. So I think they probably have thresholds that they won't go below. But I think they're different. They're different than other teams. They're different than other teams for sure. The Bills don't have a lot of athleticism at corner. The last one is safeties. The Bills have drafted 2 of those, Jaquan Johnson and Damar Hamlin, both 6th-round picks. Both are below average athletes, and both are above 190 pounds. And so when you sign Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer in free agency in 2017, you don't have much of a need at safety. And so the Bills have kind of sprinkled in a couple of 6th-round picks to develop under them. But I think because Poyer and Hyde have existed on this roster, that it really hasn't given us much to learn about their safety preferences in the draft because they really haven't had much of a need. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you learned something. I hope that this will help you and me. It's certainly going to help me laser in on the prospects we can expect the Bills to pursue and realistically target. And we can go back to this information, and as we consider different prospects the Bills would draft, we can look at some of these tendencies and realize what the qualifiers and the disqualifiers are. And it'll give us a better ability to comb through all these prospects and really figure out who the Bills are going to prioritize, or at least based on the data, who is more likely that they'll go after. And so I found this to be useful, and I hope you did as well. That's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. As always, I do kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.